What if everything you believe about needing other people's approval has been leading you away from the very peace you seek? In the next few moments, I want to share something that might shift how you see validation forever, not through force, but through understanding. There's a quiet truth about inner freedom that most people never discover because they're listening to the wrong voices. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share might change not just how you approach relationships, but who you become in the process. The people who experience genuine confidence understand something profound about human connection. It's not what you think, and by the end of this journey together, you'll see why. What if the very thing keeping you from authentic self-worth isn't what you lack, but what you're chasing? Let me share a perspective that might feel uncomfortable at first, then liberating. Let me explain what I mean. Let me begin with something we've all experienced. That subtle tension that arises when we're waiting for someone else to tell us we're enough. Have you noticed how you might craft a social media post and then check obsessively for likes and comments? There's something profound happening in these moments, something most of us miss because we're focused on the numbers, the responses, the external confirmation. Here's what I've observed. Most of us have been taught to believe that validation from others is how we measure our worth. We think that approval, praise, and recognition will lead us to feeling valuable and secure. But what if this approach is like a tree trying to grow by constantly looking up at other trees for permission to reach toward the sun? The tree that thrives isn't the one seeking approval from the forest. It's the one that quietly draws nourishment from its own roots and naturally reaches toward the light. When we constantly seek validation, we're like that confused tree, forgetting that our growth comes from within, not from the approval of others around us. Let me paint a picture that might feel familiar. You finish a project at work, something you've poured your heart into. Instead of feeling complete in the accomplishment itself, you immediately start wondering what your boss will think, what your colleagues will say, whether it will be recognized or praised. The quality of your inner experience becomes entirely dependent on external feedback. You've essentially handed over the keys to your emotional well-being to people who may not even understand what you've created. This cycle repeats in relationships, in creative endeavors, in parenting, in friendships, always looking outside ourselves for confirmation of our inherent worth. This isn't anyone's fault. We live in a world that has taught us from childhood that love and approval are conditional, that we must perform, achieve, and please in order to be worthy of care and attention. Social media has amplified this to an unprecedented degree, creating a culture where our sense of self becomes entangled with metrics and external feedback loops. But here's what's really happening beneath the surface. While we're focused on getting validation, we're actually training ourselves to distrust our own inner knowing. We're teaching ourselves that we can't be trusted to determine our own worth, our own path, our own truth. While we're focused on seeking approval, the real invitation is to understand that validation seeking is a symptom of having disconnected from our inherent wholeness. Until we see this clearly, we remain like a river, constantly asking the rocks if it's flowing in the right direction, forgetting that the river's nature is to flow, and the rocks are simply part of the landscape. Consider these questions, not to judge yourself, but to simply notice. How often do you find yourself modifying your authentic expression based on what you think others want to hear? When did you first learn that other people's opinions carried more weight than your own inner wisdom? What would it feel like if you could trust your own sense of rightness without needing external confirmation? This pattern affects 90% of us, not because we're broken, but because we're human beings living in a culture that has forgotten to teach us about our inherent worth. But what if there's another way? What if the validation you've been seeking from others has always been available within you, waiting patiently for you to remember? Before we explore this path together, let me share what changed everything for me. There was a moment in my journey when I realized something that changed everything. The validation I was desperately seeking from others was actually blocking me from experiencing the unconditional acceptance that was already present within me. Let me share what led to this understanding. I spent years crafting versions of myself that I thought would be more acceptable to others. In relationships, I would say what I thought they wanted to hear. In my work, I would present ideas based on what I believed would be well received rather than what felt most true. I was like an actor who had been playing a role for so long that I'd forgotten my authentic self. The exhaustion was profound, not just the energy it took to maintain these personas, but the deeper tiredness that comes from living disconnected from your own truth. Then came a period of illness that forced me to slow down, to be with myself without the usual distractions and performances. In that stillness, I began to notice something remarkable. There was a part of me that had never needed validation, that had always been whole, that existed independent of any external approval. It was like discovering I'd been carrying around a lantern while desperately searching for light. This experience taught me something profound about validation. It's not something we need to acquire from outside ourselves. It's something we need to stop blocking from within. Think of it like this. Imagine a spring of fresh water that bubbles up naturally from deep underground. This spring doesn't need permission to flow, doesn't need approval to be pure, doesn't need recognition to be life-giving. It simply is what it is, offering its gift freely to whoever encounters it. Your inherent worth is like that spring. It exists independent of external circumstances, flowing from the deepest part of who you are. But when we're constantly seeking validation, it's as if we've covered this spring with rocks and debris, then wondered why we feel thirsty. The spring hasn't stopped flowing. We've simply forgotten it's there beneath all the accumulated beliefs about needing others to tell us we're enough. What I discovered is that the more I sought validation, the less I could actually receive it. While most of us are trying to prove our worth to others, true self-acceptance comes from remembering that worth isn't something to be proven, it's something to be recognized as already present. This is why those who truly master inner freedom approach life differently. They understand that validation is an inside job. While others are performing for approval, they practice returning to their own center again and again. But here's what's beautiful about this understanding. When you stop seeking validation, you don't become isolated or uncaring about others. Instead, you become more genuinely loving because your love isn't tangled up with your need to be loved back. When you embrace this way of being, three things naturally emerge. First, you experience immediate relief from the exhausting work of managing others' perceptions. There's a lightness that comes when you realize you don't have to be responsible for how others see you, only for how authentically you show up. Second, your relationships gradually become more honest and satisfying. When you're not performing for approval, others feel permission to be more real with you too. The people who resonate with your authenticity naturally draw closer, while those who were only connected to your persona gradually drift away. And both movements feel like freedom. Third, you discover reserves of energy and creativity you didn't know you had. So much life force gets tied up in validation seeking that when you redirect that energy toward your authentic expression, it's like removing a dam from a river. Suddenly, there's flow where there was once only effort. Let me share an example of how this looks in practice. Imagine you're in a meeting at work and you have an idea that feels important to share. The old pattern might involve carefully crafting your words to avoid criticism, reading the room obsessively, and presenting your idea in whatever way seems most likely to be well received. The validated approach looks different. You ground yourself in the value you see in your idea, you speak from that place of inner conviction, and you hold space for whatever response comes without making it mean something about your worth. If the idea is received well, you enjoy that without needing it. If it's dismissed or criticized, you can consider the feedback without your sense of self collapsing. You've separated your identity from the outcome because you remember that your value isn't up for debate. This isn't about forcing change or becoming someone different. This is about remembering something you've always known but may have forgotten. You are inherently worthy of love and respect, not because of what you do or how others see you, but because of what you are. But there's something even deeper here. The people who no longer seek validation have discovered that they were never actually seeking validation at all. They were seeking to remember their own wholeness. The people who embody authentic self-worth have learned something that might surprise you. The validation they thought they needed from others was actually their own love trying to reach them through external channels. Here's why this works on such a profound level. When you stop seeking validation, you create space for genuine appreciation to reach you. Love can only be received by someone who already knows they're lovable. Validation can only nourish someone who already recognizes their inherent worth. Now that you understand the deeper principle, let me guide you through how to live this understanding. This is why those who truly master inner freedom approach life differently. They understand that validation is an inside job. While others are performing for approval, they practice returning to their own center again and again. But here's what's beautiful about this understanding. When you stop seeking validation, you don't become isolated or uncaring about others. Instead, you become more genuinely loving because your love is entangled up with your need to be loved back. When you embrace this way of being, three things naturally emerge. First, you experience immediate relief from the exhausting work of managing others' perceptions. There's a lightness that comes when you realize you don't have to be responsible for how others see you, only for how authentically you show up. Second, your relationships gradually become more honest and satisfying. When you're not performing for approval, others feel permission to be more real with you too. The people who resonate with your authenticity naturally draw closer, while those who were only connected to your persona gradually drift away. And both movements feel like freedom. Third, you discover reserves of energy and creativity you didn't know you had. So much life force gets tied up in validation seeking that when you redirect that energy toward your authentic expression, it's like removing a dam from a river. Suddenly, there's flow where there was once only effort. Let me share an example of how this looks in practice. Imagine you're in a meeting at work and you have an idea that feels important to share. The old pattern might involve carefully crafting your words to avoid criticism, reading the room obsessively, and presenting your idea in whatever way seems most likely to be well received. The validated approach looks different. You ground yourself in the value you see in your idea, you speak from that place of inner conviction, and you hold space for whatever response comes without making it mean something about your worth. If the idea is received well, you enjoy that without needing it. If it's dismissed or criticized, you can consider the feedback without your sense of self collapsing. You've separated your identity from the outcome because you remember that your value isn't up for debate. This isn't about forcing change or becoming someone different. This is about remembering something you've always known but may have forgotten. You are inherently worthy of love and respect, not because of what you do or how others see you, but because of what you are. But there's something even deeper here. The people who no longer seek validation have discovered that they were never actually seeking validation at all. They were seeking to remember their own wholeness. The people who embody authentic self-worth have learned something that might surprise you. The validation they thought they needed from others was actually their own love trying to reach them through external channels. Here's why this works on such a profound level. When you stop seeking validation, you create space for genuine appreciation to reach you. Love can only be received by someone who already knows they're lovable. Validation can only nourish someone who already recognizes their inherent worth. Now that you understand the deeper principle, let me guide you through how to live this understanding. Now, let me guide you through how to cultivate authentic self-worth in your daily life. This isn't a system to force results, but a way of being that allows genuine confidence to emerge naturally. These aren't rules to follow, but invitations to explore. Pay attention to what resonates, because true transformation comes from inner alignment, not external pressure. Inner knowing. The first invitation is to develop a relationship with your own inner wisdom, that part of you that knows what's true regardless of external feedback. Here's how to begin. Several times throughout your day, pause and ask yourself a simple question. What do I actually think about this? Not what you should think, not what others might want you to think, but what arises naturally when you create space for your authentic response. This practice is like learning to hear the sound of your own voice in a noisy room. When you consistently return to your inner knowing, you create space for authentic responses to emerge rather than reactive or performative ones. Most people skip this foundation because it can feel uncomfortable to discover that their authentic thoughts and feelings might differ from what's expected. But this is where all lasting confidence begins. Here's a simple way to cultivate this. Before responding in conversations, especially charged or important ones, take a breath and drop inward. Ask yourself, what wants to be said through me right now? Notice the difference between the response that comes from authenticity and the response that comes from people-pleasing. What to notice? You'll begin to feel more solid, more present, less reactive. You'll notice that you can hold space for others' responses without being knocked off center by them. Remember, developing inner knowing is like strengthening a muscle. It gets stronger with gentle, consistent practice. Example: Sarah used to agree with everything her friend said to avoid conflict. She began practicing this pause before responding. At first, she noticed how automatically she'd been saying yes to plans she didn't actually want. Gradually, she began expressing her authentic preferences. Some friends appreciated her honesty. Others were uncomfortable with her newfound authenticity. But Sarah discovered she preferred being genuinely liked for who she was rather than artificially liked for who she pretended to be. Aligned response. Once you've cultivated connection to your inner knowing, the next invitation is to practice expressing from that place of authenticity, rather than from the place that seeks approval. This isn't about forcing yourself to be confrontational or carelessly honest, but about learning to speak and act from your center rather than from your strategies for getting approval. Here's the contemplative practice. Before speaking or acting, especially in situations where you notice the old validation-seeking patterns arising, take a moment to ground yourself in what feels most true and loving, both for yourself and others. Then respond from that place. You'll know you're aligned when you feel solid in your response regardless of how it's received, not when everyone agrees with you or validates your choice. Gentle reminder, this doesn't mean being harsh or uncaring. Often, the most loving response is also the most authentic one. Truth and kindness aren't opposites, they're dance partners. Wisdom in practice. Marcus used to craft his dating profile and messages based on what he thought would get the most matches. When he began responding from authentic interest rather than strategic positioning, he got fewer matches but much better connections. The people who responded were actually interested in who he was, not who he was pretending to be. Patient cultivation. This foundation separates those who create lasting inner freedom from those who experience temporary confidence boosts. Most people approach validation like trying to fill a leaky bucket, always needing more, never feeling satisfied. True self-worth is more like tending a garden. It requires patience, consistency, and trust in natural cycles of growth. Here's how to practice this. When you notice the old patterns of seeking validation arising, instead of judging yourself or forcing yourself to change, simply get curious. Oh, there's that old pattern again. What is it trying to tell me? What do I actually need right now? The key is compassionate awareness rather than self-improvement pressure. Without this understanding, you'll just create new ways to seek validation, this time for being evolved or authentic. Deep practice. Spend time regularly in activities that nourish you regardless of external recognition. This might be walking in nature, creating art that no one else sees, reading books that feed your soul, or simply sitting quietly with yourself. These practices remind you that your well-being doesn't depend on external input. Natural expression. Finally, this is about allowing your authentic self to express itself naturally through your life without the filter of, will this be approved of? This isn't about performing authenticity or making a show of being yourself, but about removing the barriers to your natural way of being. When you truly remember your inherent worth, it naturally expresses itself as genuine warmth, creativity, and presence. Here's the practice. Throughout your day, notice the moments when you feel most alive, most yourself, most connected to what matters to you. These moments often happen when you're not thinking about how you're being perceived. Begin to cultivate more of these moments intentionally. You'll notice that you become more interesting to others, not because you're trying to be impressive, but because you're genuinely engaged with life rather than managing your image. Wisdom reminder: authenticity isn't a personality type or a way of acting, it's what emerges when you stop trying to be someone else. Weaving together. These foundations work together like the roots, trunk, branches, and leaves of a tree, each supporting and nourishing the others. When you cultivate inner knowing, respond from authenticity, practice patient self-acceptance, and allow natural expression, genuine confidence emerges as naturally as spring following winter. Timeline. This isn't about achieving some milestone in 30 days, but about beginning a lifelong practice of remembering who you are beneath all the strategies for getting approval. Trust that each moment of choosing authenticity over approval seeking is valuable in itself. The beauty of this approach is that you're not trying to become someone new, you're removing the barriers to who you've always been. As we near the end of our time together, I want to address some thoughts that might be arising. This feels too simple or different. I understand this feeling. You might be thinking this approach seems too gentle, too internal, too different from the confidence advice you've heard before. In a world that celebrates aggressive self-promotion and strategic positioning, this gentle path might feel unfamiliar. But consider this. The most profound transformations in nature happen slowly and from within. An oak tree doesn't become mighty by forcing its growth or comparing itself to other trees. It simply draws nourishment from its roots and reaches naturally toward the light. The most profound transformations in nature happen gradually and organically. Your journey toward authentic self-worth deserves the same respect. I've tried working on confidence before. Your past experiences matter, and I honor your journey. You might feel discouraged by previous attempts to build self-esteem or confidence. What makes this different isn't the techniques, but the recognition that you're not trying to build something new, you're removing the barriers to what's already present. I once worked with someone who had tried every confidence course, read every self-help book, practiced every affirmation technique. Nothing created lasting change because he was still operating from the assumption that confidence was something he needed to acquire rather than something he needed to stop blocking. When he shifted to simply noticing and gently releasing his validation-seeking patterns, his natural confidence began to emerge without effort. What if I don't have the patience or discipline? This concern itself reveals something beautiful. You're already more aware than most. The fact that you're questioning your readiness shows you understand that real change takes time and gentle persistence. Remember, you already have everything you need within you. The practices aren't about developing superhuman discipline, they're about returning again and again to what you already know is true. The question isn't whether you can perfectly implement these practices, but whether you're willing to be patient and kind with yourself as you remember your inherent worth. How do I know this will work for me? This question contains its own answer. You'll know this path is right for you, not by external results or other people's validation of your progress, but by an increasing sense of coming home to yourself. You'll recognize you're on the right path when you feel more solid in yourself, less reactive to others' opinions, more genuinely interested in life rather than in managing how you're perceived. You'll know this path is right when you feel internal resonance, not when others validate your choice to pursue authenticity. Remember, the part of you asking this question already knows the answer. Trust your inner wisdom to guide you toward what serves your highest good. As we close our time together, I want to leave you with an invitation, not an instruction. Your journey toward authentic self-worth doesn't require dramatic action or immediate transformation. It asks for something much more profound: the willingness to question the assumption that your worth depends on external validation. Here's what I invite you to consider. Today, pause before responding in conversations and notice the difference between authentic expression and approval seeking. Simply notice without judgment. This week, spend time daily in activities that nourish you, regardless of recognition: walking, creating, reading, being quiet with yourself. Moving forward, embrace a way of being that prioritizes inner alignment over external approval, knowing that genuine relationships actually flourish when you show up authentically. There's no rush. There's no deadline. Authentic confidence will emerge in its own time when you create the right conditions within yourself. Trust that your willingness to question validation-seeking patterns is already the beginning of freedom. Remember, you don't need to become someone different to experience genuine self-worth. You need to remember who you already are beneath all the strategies for getting approval. The path is already present within you, waiting to be walked. Your only job is to take the first gentle step away from seeking validation and toward remembering your inherent wholeness. Your authentic self has been patiently waiting for you to stop looking elsewhere for what you've always carried within. As you move forward, carry this understanding with you. The validation you seek from others is your own love trying to reach you. Thank you for allowing me to share this journey with you. May you find the courage to be authentically yourself, and may your path be filled with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your inherent worth. The world needs what you have to offer when you're living from authenticity rather than approval seeking. Trust the process, trust yourself, and trust that your genuine presence is a gift that doesn't require external validation to be valuable. Here's to your gentle transformation and the quiet wisdom that guides you home to yourself.